The rain pelted against Dominic Harrison's weather station windows like tiny meteorites, each drop a reminder of why he'd chosen this remote mountaintop location for his research. As the lead meteorologist at the Highland Peak Weather Observatory, he'd witnessed countless storms, but something about tonight's downpour felt different. The atmospheric readings were off the charts, showing patterns he'd never seen before in 15 years of studying weather phenomena. Dominic adjusted his instruments, double-checking the peculiar energy signatures registering on his equipment. The storm had appeared out of nowhere, defying all predictive models. Lightning crackled across the sky in impossible geometric patterns, casting the observation deck in brief flashes of electric blue. "This can't be right," he muttered, tapping the barometric pressure gauge. The needle swung wildly, as if the very air was being compressed and released by some unseen force. Thunder rolled overhead, but instead of the usual boom, it came in rhythmic pulses, almost like a heartbeat. The first sign that this wasn't a normal storm came when the raindrops began falling upward. Dominic watched, slack-jawed, as water droplets reversed direction, floating skyward in defiance of gravity. The air crackled with static electricity, making his hair stand on end. His instruments went haywire, screens flickering with impossible readings before shorting out completely. A brilliant flash illuminated the night sky, brighter than any lightning he'd ever seen. Dominic shielded his eyes, and when he lowered his hand, he saw them, two figures hovering in the air outside his window, surrounded by a sphere of swirling water droplets. They were humanoid but clearly not human. Their skin shimmered like polished opal, shifting colors in the storm's light. Both were tall and willowy, with elongated limbs and fingers that seemed to have too many joints. Their eyes were the most striking feature, large, multifaceted like diamonds, and glowing with an inner light. Dominic stood frozen, his scientific mind warring with the impossible sight before him. The figures drifted closer, and he noticed they weren't wearing anything resembling clothing. Instead, their bodies were covered in what appeared to be living crystal formations that grew and shifted like organic armor. The taller of the two raised a hand, and the window between them simply dissolved. Rain poured in, but instead of flooding the room, it formed a spiral staircase of water droplets. The aliens descended this impossible structure with elegant grace. "Greetings, observer of storms," the first one spoke, its voice resonating like wind chimes. "I am Nixis, and this is my research partner, Venna. We come seeking knowledge of your world's water cycles." Dominic's scientific training kicked in, overriding his fear with curiosity. "I'm Dr. Dominic Harrison," he managed to say. You're here to study our weather." Venna stepped forward, her crystalline covering chiming softly as she moved. "Your planet's hydrological systems are unique in our explored galaxy. We've traveled far to understand them." She gestured to the storm outside. "This precipitation event, you call it rain, yes? Fascinating how it maintains your world's equilibrium. You created this storm?" Dominic asked, his professional interest piqued despite the bizarre situation. "A small demonstration of our atmospheric manipulation capabilities," Nixis explained. "Though we seem to have miscalculated some of the electrical discharge patterns. Your planet's magnetic field is more complex than our initial scans indicated." Dominic found himself relaxing slightly, falling into familiar scientific discussion. "The interaction between the magnetosphere and weather patterns is one of my primary research areas. Would you like to see my data?" Both aliens' eyes brightened noticeably. "You collect systematic observations?" Venna asked, moving to examine his equipment with obvious interest. "Our people value such methodical study. Perhaps we could exchange knowledge." As Dominic began explaining his research, the strangeness of the situation gradually faded into the background. Here were beings from another world, yet they spoke the universal language of scientific inquiry. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the observatory, a different kind of phenomenon was taking place, the first exchange of meteorological knowledge between Earth and whatever distant world his visitors called home. What Dominic didn't yet realize was that this rainy night marked the beginning of an adventure that would challenge everything he knew about weather, worlds, and his own place in the universe. The true nature of Nix's and Vena's visit would prove far more complex than a simple scientific expedition, but for now, he lost himself in the joy of sharing his life's work with the most unique research colleagues he'd ever encountered. Dominic spent the next few days in a state of perpetual amazement as he watched Nix's and Vena interact with Earth's weather systems. The aliens had transformed his modest weather station into something resembling a hybrid between a laboratory and an art installation, with crystalline instruments growing from the walls and floating displays made of manipulated water droplets. "Your atmosphere is remarkably dynamic," Nixis observed, running her elongated fingers through a miniature cloud formation she'd created in the center of the room. "On our world, the air is still, controlled. We've forgotten what it means to have weather that moves of its own accord." Dominic watched as the tiny cloud produced equally tiny snowflakes. "You mentioned your world, what's it like? I can't even imagine a place without weather patterns." Vena moved to join them, her crystalline covering catching the morning light and splitting it into rainbow patterns across the walls. "Crystallos is a world of order and structure. Our cities are grown, not built, rising from the mineral-rich ground in perfect geometric patterns. The atmosphere is regulated by vast crystal matrices that ensure optimal conditions at all times." "Sounds beautiful," Dominic said, though he couldn't help but notice a hint of sadness in Vena's multifaceted eyes. "Beautiful, yes," she agreed, "but perhaps too perfect. We've engineered away the chaos that gives your world such vitality." As they talked, Dominic noticed something odd about the way his visitors interacted with water. Whenever they came in contact with it, the liquid seemed to respond to them, forming intricate patterns before being absorbed directly into their crystalline covering. His scientific curiosity got the better of him. "May I ask, what exactly happens when you touch water? I've never seen fluid dynamics behave that way." Nixis and Vena exchanged glances, communicating in that silent way they sometimes did. Finally, Nixis spoke. "Our bodies are composed of living crystal matrices, similar to your organic cells but based on mineral structures. Water molecules can be integrated directly into these matrices, enhancing our energy systems. Like photosynthesis, but with water instead of light," Dominic suggested, trying to frame it in familiar terms. "A simplified comparison, but not entirely inaccurate," Vena said. "Though the process is more complex than mere energy production. Water holds memories, patterns, information. When we absorb it, we also absorb these patterns." This revelation sparked dozens of new questions in Dominic's mind, but before he could ask them, his equipment began beeping urgently. A massive storm system was developing offshore, far larger than anything predicted by the weather models. "That's impossible," he muttered, checking the readings. "The conditions aren't right for a storm of this magnitude." "Ah," Nixis said, sounding almost embarrassed. "That may be an unintended consequence of our presence. Our crystal matrices appear to be interfering with your planet's natural weather patterns." Dominic stared at the radar display in growing concern. "This storm could cause serious damage if it hits the coast. Can you stop it?" "Direct intervention in large-scale weather events is challenging," Vena admitted. "Our control is not as precise in your atmosphere as it is on Crystallos." The implications hit Dominic like a thunderbolt. His visitor's mere presence was disrupting Earth's weather systems. What had started as fascinating scientific exchange suddenly felt more complicated, more dangerous. "We should be able to deflect the worst of it," Nixis assured him, placing her hand on the window. Crystal formations began spreading across the glass, forming complex patterns that pulsed with inner light. "But this raises concerns about the longer-term effects of our stay." Dominic watched as his visitors worked in concert, their crystalline coverings resonating at frequencies he could feel in his bones. The storm on the radar began to fragment, breaking apart into smaller, less dangerous systems. But the effort seemed to take a toll on them, their usual iridescent glow dimmed, and fine cracks appeared in their crystal armor. "You're hurting yourselves," he realized, stepping forward in concern. Venna managed a weak smile. "A temporary strain. Our matrices will regenerate. But you begin to understand why we came to your world, Dominic Harrison. Our perfect, controlled environment has left us, fragile. Unable to adapt to chaos and change. There's more you haven't told me, isn't there?" Dominic asked, though he already knew the answer. The sadness he'd glimpsed earlier in their eyes, the intense interest in Earth's water systems, it all hinted at something bigger than mere scientific curiosity. "Yes," Nixus acknowledged. "But before we can explain further, we must be certain. The patterns we've absorbed from your world's water, they show promise, but we need more data. More understanding." As the crisis passed and the storm dissipated, Dominic found himself facing a decision. His visitors were clearly not telling him everything, and their presence posed potential risks to Earth's weather systems. Scientific integrity demanded he report these findings to his superiors. But something held him back, the genuine wonder they showed in Earth's natural processes, their willingness to harm themselves to prevent damage to his world, and most of all, the growing sense that they were refugees of sorts, seeking something vital that their perfect world had lost. "Then let's gather more data," he heard himself say. "But this time, we do it carefully. Together." The gratitude in their crystalline eyes told him he'd made the right choice, even as the scientist in him wondered what he was getting himself into. The storm had passed, but Dominic had a feeling it was just the beginning of much bigger changes to come. The truth emerged on a quiet evening 3 weeks after Nixus and Venna's arrival. Dominic had been analyzing data from their latest atmospheric experiments when he noticed a pattern in their crystal matrices' interaction with water. They weren't just studying the water, they were desperately searching for something within it. "Your crystals are dying, aren't they?" he said quietly, not looking up from his monitors. The sudden stillness in the room confirmed his suspicion. Nixus moved to stand beside him, her usually melodic voice heavy with emotion. "How did you determine this? The way you absorb water, it's not just for energy or information. You're testing each sample, looking for specific molecular patterns. Like someone searching for a cure." Dominic turned to face them. "Tell me everything. No more half-truths." Venna joined them, her crystalline covering noticeably duller than when they'd first arrived. "Our world is experiencing what we call the Great Dimming. The crystal matrices that form the foundation of our civilization, our cities, our technology, our very bodies, are losing their resonance. We thought we had perfected our world," Nixus continued, creating a holographic image of crystallos using suspended water droplets. "The planet that appeared was breathtaking, cities of geometric crystal spires reaching toward twin suns, everything arranged in perfect, mathematical harmony. Then the image changed, showing cracks spreading through the structures, crystals turning cloudy and dark. At first, we thought it was a natural cycle," Venna explained. "But the degradation accelerated. Our scientists discovered that in pursuing perfection, we had removed too much chaos from our crystal matrices. Without the random elements that drive evolution and adaptation, our entire civilization began to stagnate." Dominic watched as the holographic city crumbled. "And you think Earth's water holds the solution?" "Water is the most perfect imperfect substance we've encountered," Nixus said. "It defies expected behavior, maintains quantum coherence at higher temperatures than should be possible, carries information in ways we still don't fully understand. If anything can reintroduce the necessary chaos into our matrices, it's this." "But there's something you're not telling me," Dominic pressed. "Why here? Why my weather station?" The aliens exchanged that meaningful look he'd come to recognize. Finally, Venna spoke. "We chose you, Dominic Harrison. We observed many weather researchers, but you alone showed the combination of scientific rigor and intuitive understanding we needed. You study chaos and find patterns within it, yet you never seek to eliminate the chaos itself. We need your help," Nixus added. The water samples we've collected show promise, but we don't fully understand the conditions needed to make them viable. Your storms, they create unique energetic patterns we've never seen before. Patterns that could be the key to saving our world. Dominic ran a hand through his hair, mind racing with implications. But your presence here affects our weather patterns. If we increase our experiments, the disruptions could become dangerous. We know, Venna acknowledged. It is the great irony of our situation. The very experiments that could save our world risk damaging yours. There's more, Nixis said hesitantly. Time grows short. The great dimming accelerates. If we cannot find a solution soon, Crystallos will become a tomb of dead crystal, our people trapped in matrices that can no longer sustain consciousness. The weight of their revelation settled over the room like a heavy fog. Dominic stood, walking to the window where the first stars were becoming visible in the twilight sky. Somewhere out there was a dying world of crystal, its people facing extinction because they'd pursued perfection too far. How long? He asked. Perhaps 3 of your months before the degradation becomes irreversible, Venna answered. We are not the only research team searching for solutions, but we are the last to explore the water hypothesis. Dominic turned back to them, seeing now the desperate hope they carried beneath their composed exteriors. If we succeed, if we find a way to restore your crystal's resonance, what then? Would you share this knowledge with Earth? All of it, Nixis promised. Our understanding of crystal technologies, atmospheric control, energy manipulation, everything we know would be yours. Our peoples could help each other, learn from each other's mistakes. And if we fail? Then at least we tried, Venna said softly. Better to risk everything in pursuit of survival than to fade away in perfect, sterile silence. Dominic looked at his visitors, no, his friends, and made his decision. We'll need to modify the equipment, find a way to contain the atmospheric disruptions. And we'll need contingency plans in case things go wrong. The relief that washed over their faces was almost palpable, their crystal coverings briefly glowing brighter. Thank you, Nixis said, her voice thick with emotion. Don't thank me yet, Dominic cautioned, already pulling up weather models on his computer. We're about to attempt something unprecedented, trying to save an alien civilization using Earth's rainstorms. The real work is just beginning. As they gathered around his monitors, beginning to plan their expanded experiments, Dominic couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. A month ago, his biggest concern had been predicting next week's weather. Now he was part of a desperate race to save a world of living crystal using the chaos of Earth's storms. The scientist in him was terrified of what could go wrong. But another part, the part that had first looked up at the stars as a child and dreamed of discovering something extraordinary, was thrilled to be part of this impossible mission. Thunder rumbled in the distance, as if nature herself was acknowledging the magnitude of their undertaking. The storm was coming. They had work to do. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a black SUV winding its way up the mountain road to the weather station. Dominic spotted it through his binoculars during a break between experiments, its government plates gleaming in the morning sun. We need to hide you, he told Nixis and Venna, who were in the middle of analyzing their latest storm data. Someone's coming. Our crystal matrices can bend light, Nixis offered, but Dominic shook his head. They'll have thermal sensors, electromagnetic detection equipment. We've been generating too many unusual readings, they're bound to check thoroughly. The past 2 weeks had been a blur of increasingly complex experiments. They'd made progress, discovering that lightning strikes created unique resonance patterns in water molecules that showed promise for crystal regeneration. But each test had produced more atmospheric anomalies, harder to hide or explain away. The storage basement, Dominic decided. It's lined with old lead shielding from when this place was a radiation monitoring station. Should block most scans. They barely got his visitors hidden before 3 people entered the station, 2 men in dark suits and a woman in a military uniform with colonel's insignia. Dr. Harrison, the colonel stepped forward. I'm Colonel Teresa Richards, Advanced Atmospheric Research Division. We need to discuss the unusual weather patterns you've been recording. Dominic forced a casual smile. Unusual patterns are kind of my specialty, Colonel. It's why they put me up here. Not like these, one of the suits said, pulling out a tablet. Localized storm systems that defy atmospheric physics. Electromagnetic anomalies that match no known natural phenomena. And energy signatures that look suspiciously like what our deep space monitoring stations picked up 3 weeks ago. Dominic's heart raced, but years of defending controversial research papers helped him maintain his composure. I've been testing some new theoretical models about storm formation. The results have been unexpected. Dr. Harrison, Colonel Richards said, her voice softening slightly, we know you're not working alone. Our satellites have picked up traces of crystalline structures unlike anything on Earth. We've detected water molecules arranged in impossible configurations. Something is happening here, something beyond normal meteorological research. If you know that much, Dominic said carefully, then you know whatever's happening isn't hostile. No one's been harmed. Yet, the second suit interjected. But our models show these atmospheric disruptions growing. If they continue to escalate dash. A sudden rumble interrupted him as the entire building trembled. Dominic's heart sank. They'd set up an automated experiment to trigger during what should have been his lunch break, forgetting to cancel it when the visitors arrived. Everyone rushed to the windows. Outside, a vortex of water droplets was forming in clear sky, defying gravity as it spiraled upward. Lightning crackled within it, but instead of normal bolts, the electricity formed complex geometric patterns. My God, Colonel Richards breathed. It's beautiful. It's dangerous, the first suit snapped, pulling out his phone. I'm calling in the containment team. Wait. Dominic moved to stop him, but the second suit grabbed his arm. The colonel raised her hand. Everyone calm down. Dr. Harrison, I suggest you tell us exactly what's happening here before this escalates further. Before Dominic could respond, a crystalline chime echoed through the room. Everyone turned to see Nixis and Venna emerging from the basement, their bodies glowing with inner light. We will explain, Nixis said, her voice resonating with quiet authority. We meant no harm to your world, Venna added. We seek only to save our own. The suits reached for weapons, but Colonel Richards barked, stand down. She studied the aliens with intense interest. You're the source of the crystal signatures we detected. Why are you here? Over the next hour, Nixis and Venna explained everything, the great dimming, their desperate search for a solution, the promising results they'd found in Earth storms. Dominic added his own observations, showing their research data and the precautions they'd been taking. If we succeed, he concluded, both our worlds could benefit. Their crystal technology, our atmospheric understanding, together we could revolutionize clean energy, weather control, even space travel. Or you could tear apart our atmosphere trying, the first suit argued. These experiments are affecting weather patterns across the region. If they grow stronger dash. We understand the risks, Nixis interrupted. We would never knowingly harm the world that represents our last hope. Colonel Richards had been quiet for several minutes, studying their data displays. Finally, she spoke. Let me be clear, you're conducting unauthorized experiments that affect Earth's atmosphere, using alien technology we barely understand, all to save a distant world we have no way to verify even exists. Yes, Dominic said simply. To everyone's surprise, the colonel smiled. Excellent. I want in. Colonel, both suits protested simultaneously. Think about it, she cut them off. Either we shut this down and lose any chance to understand their technology, or we help them and potentially gain access to advanced crystal-based atmospheric control systems. Which better serves our interests? You can't be serious, the first suit sputtered. I am. But, she turned to Dominic and the aliens, we do this properly. full documentation, safety protocols, and a military weather research team on site to help contain any atmospheric disruptions. That could actually help, Dominic admitted. More hands, more equipment, better containment capabilities. Nixis and Vena conferred silently, then Nixis spoke. We would accept these terms, provided we maintain control of our crystal technology. Some aspects are dangerous in untrained hands. Agreed, the colonel said. We'll call it Project Rainfall. Official cover story will be Advanced Weather Modification Research. She glared at the suits until they reluctantly nodded agreement. As plans were made and papers signed, Dominic felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They were no longer alone in their impossible task. But as he watched the colonel examining Nixis and Vena's crystal matrices with poorly concealed excitement, he wondered if they'd just solved one problem by creating another. The storm outside had dissipated, but on the horizon, darker clouds were gathering. The real storm, Dominic suspected, was still to come.